Alright, guys, I'm the world around you, and this is Pause for Thought on Threshold FM. And this week we're going to go into another history episode, like we've had Henry Avery, and that guy that Moriarty was based off of in Sherlock, who I always fucking forget the name of. But another little history episode for us. And this guy was a massive influential guy of Northern American history. He's related to conspiracy theory and American history. And I'm pretty sure you've already heard me mention his name a little bit in previous episodes. His name's Admiral Richard E. Byrd, and him and his family have been involved in some big parts of American history. He was born in 1888 to Richard Byrd II, and he would go on to invoke mystery and leave his name on international history until at least, today. His dad, Willie, founded an entire city now known as Richmond in Virginia, and probably was known as Richmond in Virginia back then. And it looks as though they had a plantation, or at least Williams's parents had, or grandparents had a plantation. What's weird though, is that I always thought the people that owned plantations at the time would be like high society because they were making so much money in the area, albeit fucking in a terrible way. But I've always assumed that they would be high society, but it doesn't seem like they really were, because a lot of the money that they made was spent on their own education and the children's education rather than on buying more land. And from what I've heard, a lot of the work the family did as well, they did it for payments in kind, which I've interpreted as in exchange for influence with fucking well-to-do people. And it's sad. It's said to say that they had a middle-class lifestyle kind of thing. Like, it seems weird, isn't it, really, that Richard would go on to become an officer in the US Navy, because I've always thought if you were an officer in the Navy, especially in England at least, maybe it's more of a modern thing, I don't know, but I thought officers were people from quite high society, like the families are normally minted in it, and that's why they're not thrown to the front line. Where in reality, I was thinking a good idea though would be like, nowadays they should have conscription for the army, but not like normal conscription and what it was. Conscription should be for every single politician's family. All of their kids up until the age of 30 should be conscripted into the army and sent to the front lines, because maybe then wars would be settled, and because the politicians would be too scared to lose their kids. I don't know, it's just a thought. Maybe I've misunderstood something there. Maybe they have to go to war, I'm not sure. But anyway, maybe it's just more important though to request favours for jobs rather than actual money. Now, there's a good chance the biggest influence that the Byrd family ever had on the English-speaking world ever is just a simple expression, because I love a bit of etymology, not entomology. I mean, I like bugs as well, but etymology, where words and phrases come from. And the expression is every Tom, Dick and Harry, because Richard himself, Richard E. Byrd, was the middle sibling of his eldest brother Tom, or Thomas, and his younger brother Harry. So they were literally Tom, Dick and Harry. And even though later on in life, I think it was fucking Harry would go on to become a senator. Two of them. So I think it was, off the top of my head, I think it was Richard and Harry. I think one of the Harry was the senator, and then them pair, they were in a gang called the Western Gang, which was in a sort of gang war at the time against another gang called the Potato Hill Gang. Now, it's weird that these people would be able to have positions of power, in my opinion, because, well, maybe that's why gang culture now is talked down on so much. Maybe they got to them positions of power through winning these gang fights, in fucking in Virginia, stabbing each other in Richmond and that, and now all of a sudden, I'm a senator. But I could be wrong. I mean, he's not a senator now. He was a senator until the 60s. I imagine this guy's fucking long dead. But maybe they're trying to disguise the fact that gang warfare has always been knocking about, But anyway, not really going to focus on his family. We're going to try and focus on Admiral Richard Byrd rather than his family. And at the turn of the 20th century, the 12-year-old Ricky was sent to the Philippines to live with his uncle, where he apparently kept extensive diaries. And at one point, he wrote in his diaries about how he'd seen, he was living there with his uncle, innit, and he watched a load of court hearings, which I think his uncle preceded, or led, I think preceded is the right word, but his uncle was leading these things, And he was shocked even at the age of 12, and the diaries go into detail about how he'd watched these for hangings for the locals, and he was shocked at how accepting of the crimes the people were. Then, when he came back to America, he attended school, and my gut tells me it was naval school, but I can't remember off the top of his head. Whilst he was there, though, he excelled at maths and at navigational skills, but during a PE class he managed to break an already injured ankle, which led to his classmates passing out, not because they saw like a compound fracture out. I don't mean it like that, innit? Like, that's literally the term apparently for finishing military school, is passing out. So it's not like because he had a weak stomach or out like that. It's just the term for it, which I didn't know, which is probably going to make me sound fucking dumb, because I'm going to guess that might be something that more people know, but I've never really looked into anything to do with military school or out like that. Anyway, they passed out before he did that, but all that meant was that he got to spend longer learning, really. And I can't help but wonder if they call it passing out, though, because it seems like a lot of military training is about destroying a person's individuality, innit? Like, they want them to work as a collective, as a group, as a one together. Like, almost like the soul of the person's dying, if you get what I mean, or the energy within a person's now slowly becoming unnecessary through the training and the screaming in your face from some bald bloke and that. Almost like the sleeping, but I mean that's probably not right, because anytime there are people on a boat though, and when they're in the Navy they're always on a boat, and when you are on a boat you consider the soul, you're no longer a person. When you're on a boat you're a soul. So I could be wrong there, innit? And actually in naval school they're going to want to keep them in their souls, aren't they? They're going to want to keep the souls in the body, because why would you then want disembodied souls in the boats? Because that's just a ghost ship, which wasn't intentional, but because that's actually a thing, and it's not even like a flat earthing term either. But you know what I mean, though. That might be where the passing out comes from, but I don't know. Again, I didn't really look into it, but I think they're going to want to keep. I think the Navy wanted to, at least back then, maybe, the Navy wanted to keep their souls. And especially if my theory about how James Cameron's films and how James Cameron ties into Richard E Byrd, if that's correct, then I think they did want to keep the souls. But anyway, we'll stick with Richard for now, and we'll get onto that towards the end, because I gotta get you there, Now, Richie's first notable expedition was to the North Pole, but it was more like when you go somewhere with your mate in his new car as a teenager, or what spiritualists will try and force you to believe that the journey itself is more important and not the destination, because not many people, even experts on his life, like they seem to believe he definitely went to the North Pole, and they say that he probably went there, but most likely he just saw it from his cockpit window, then turned around and headed home, which still seems impressive for the time. But like, even in 1926 it wasn't enough to break any records. I don't know if they had Guinness World Records back then. I think Guinness existed then, but I don't know if they had the books. I think it's mad to be able to say a continuous fucking 80 miles an hour there and back. That they still didn't break any records. And he was a bloke that would regularly toot his own horn as well, apparently, but it seems like he only showed off about things that were worth showing off about, which makes some people believe he was humble, like a humble bragger, if you get what I mean. And because he didn't actually break any record-breaking times, he didn't see this as something that was particularly special. And in his talks or interviews and news reports about him, they all regard him, as being quite humble about his achievements. Now, that could be because he was just more focused on learning how to use new techniques and equipment, which is really what allowed him to make the round trip back and forth to the Arctic. This is a few years before Antarctica. So for those of you that are wondering, because I had to look this up, the Arctic is the one at the top in the north, and the Antarctica is at the south. That's the South Pole, just for reference for the rest of the show. Now, apparently, he was during the flight, he'd be running up and down the plane to a side window that was always facing, well, it always at least had sunlight coming in through the window, and it was because of that he was able to navigate the globe in the direction that he needed to navigate in, and how he knew where he was going, because apparently it would use sun's rays, the compass, because when you get to, well, at least in the 1920s, when you would get so high, obviously in a plane or up a mountain, I don't know if it would work in a mountain because you're still kind of near the ground, aren't you? You're still touching the ground. But at least in the air, like, using it in aviation, when you're flying anyway, the compasses back then wouldn't use the magnetic pull of the earth if they got too high. So they had to develop what was, I think it was called a solar compass, I think, which sounds like something that would be in like Assassin's Creed, like the golden apple kind of thing. But anyway, it was all this love of new technology that had allowed him to take part in a bit of a marketing campaign for the post office, which was a flight from the 29th of June 1927 until the 1st of July 1927, where they used a twin-engine plane from America all the way to Paris and back again in order to deliver a letter. Now, this was so that they could demonstrate the possible commercial uses of aeroplanes, but unfortunately, when they got to Paris, it was apparently way too foggy to land his plane, and he had to turn back and then had to, in the end, basically fucking crash into the ocean near the coast and swim back to the shore. Now, I think it was an American shore, but honestly, I can't remember. And this obvious oversight, though, of him not actually making the journey, that didn't seem to dissuade the use of planes, because the media at the time reported it as a success, so then people bought into the use of planes a little bit more, which I guess meant they could then encourage people to come and work for them to build planes, because people would see it maybe as a career that was a viable career that would last or something, and then they could obviously use the planes in fucking bombing campaigns in future wars. But, I mean, this was all part of the guy's charm, though, like Richard E. Byrd's charm. He was mad at PR, mate, and I can't help but wonder if that's what all of the stuff about mammoths that he goes on about and seeing the UFOs, was that just a way of getting more people interested in joining the naval or the armed forces in general? Or maybe just a way of introducing more people to his love of aviation and exploration in general. And he was one day quoted as saying something along the lines of, they're not... people nowadays don't actually see an explorer in high regard. Like they don't hold an explorer in high regard no more. And maybe by claiming to find a bunch of extinct creatures and aliens, or an ancient forgotten people, or even engaging in evasive manoeuvres over Antarctica from Nazi UFOs, would be a great way to get the armed forces more attention, especially after World War II, with everyone thinking about that war's over now. So that'd mean, well, I think he did it after. I think it was after World War II. I thought I'd made a mistake there, but I think it was. He did do bits after World War II, and I mean World War One was definitely over, and he did a bit in between, and he did a little bit just after World War II. But with everyone thinking that was, that it was over, they might think that now there's no need for them anymore, for the planes and explorers and the Navy. But little did they know that America was just getting started with its international campaigns of warfare against continents all around the globe. So that, would never really be an issue for anyone that was, signing up or being forced to sign up. Now, I can't help but wonder if there's a chance that it's because of Byrd's exploits and tales that so many people joined the American forces, and because they had so many troops, they decided, yeah, fuck it, let's carry on, trying to attack the Asians, which is something that they kind of had him preparing to do towards, I think it was just before World War II and towards the end of World War II, they were sort of preparing to attack in Asia. Well, I'll go into that later, that's on another page in my notes. But again, though, that's something that I don't think we'll ever know, if it's because they had so many people sign up and they were like, well, we don't want to turn people away. Fucking hell, it'd be mad to turn them away. We want to look strong, so let's fuck it, let's have them all in, and we'll have Vietnam in a few years. We'll train them up and we'll have a little, skirmishes here and there and that. Anyway, this knack for PR, though, would allow Dickie Byrd to host a private expedition to Antarctica. Now, at this point, he's a retired naval officer due to his injury, and he was only in like his mid-20s, and he was still on 3/4 pay, apparently, as well, from the US Navy. And he decided the best way to invest his money and time would be to explore the little-known areas of Antarctica, which was, I suppose, most of it, really. Except he organised it all, and by the end of organising it, with a few weeks to go, maybe 2 weeks or so to go, or maybe I think it was a week, actually. I think it all happened within a week. It's mad. Anyway, he was about 380 grand short for it, and then within a few days, fuck it, who cares? Within a few days before like setting sail, his accountant came to him and told him it was just impossible. He wouldn't be able to do it. So he got on the phone and presumably started calling in favours from about. It was about 15 people, and who were all like fucking big names at the time, and some of them you'll recognise, innit? I can see some of them now here. And together, though, those people, them 15 mates of his, or 15 associates, shall we say, associates is better because they actually called themselves the Byrd Aviation Associates, which is BYRD, not BIRD, so don't be thinking, or drones and that, don't be thinking the drones are the birds and that. It's not, that's not where the birds or drones thing comes from. Anyway, between the Byrd of Aviation Associates, they raised $280,000 that Byrd needed because he managed to actually raise $100,000 himself from making a bunch of other phone calls. Now, some of the names of these guys, like I said, they ring a bell. You've got Joseph Pulitzer, Otto Kahn, Bernard Baruch, or Baruch, Baruch. I mean, like I say, they kind of ring a bell to an extent. Joseph Pulitzer more, and I'm sure I've seen the other names somewhere, but I don't know what they did. I don't know what Pulitzer did either. I know there's an award. I think it's for poetry, but I think I could be wrong, or writing, literature or something. But they might be episodes in the future if there's enough on them to fucking fill an hour. Anyway, the point is, they were all supposedly influential men of their time, innit? Now, another name that gets involved in the Antarctica expedition is Ford, surprisingly, because one of the planes that was used at the time, that Byrd actually used, that Byrd flew in, was the Ford tri-motored airplane. Obviously, that means it was a plane with 3 engines, and I don't really know much more about the plane or about Ford's involvement with the whole operation itself, but this will link a little later, but Ford could also be a weird link to a later leader of the so-called Antarctic research who was a Norwegian, which links to tall whites, the race of aliens, which also sounds a lot like airlines, and Ford sounds a lot like fjord, which I think has something to do with water in Norway, a place where I assume the water is very cold, like the water is very cold in Antarctica. So there's links in it, like not like again, like it's just a link, not actual evidence of alien involvement within all this, but there is a link there. Interestingly though, the lecture I watched about Richard E. Byrd's life had the segment about his flights over Antarctica edited out of it, for YouTube. So that makes me think maybe, there was a little bit in there about the UFOs, but YouTube made him remove it, as they do. Almost, with everything it's like they're trying to remove all this information so we don't know the truth. We don't know what's going on with it. And obviously, if you do want to know the truth, listen to Truth Seeking, tomorrow night on Threshold FM at 7:00. Anyway, it's weird, isn't it? It's fucking weird that we don't know what was actually what was being said, like, by Byrd. Like, there's no, and the evidence, it wasn't there. Like, why would you take that out of the fucking lecture? That's clearly the most fucking interesting piece of it. That's the only reason why I was watching the lecture. Let's have a song. This is Uncle Sam Goddamn by Brother Ali. Richard E. Byrd's expeditions would lead him to Little America too, which, luckily, isn't a weird, segregated part of the ice cap full of morbidly obese people, though, ironically, it is just a little bit past the so-called Bay of Whales, and there's been at least 5 of these Little Americas that I can find out about over the years, because for some reason they build them on little tiny ice shelves that then tend to break off, and they'll either sink into the Ross Sea just after the Bay of Whales, or they just fucking float off and then later sink into the ocean. Which is fucking, it just seems like badly thought up. You'd think they'd take a load of fucking like steel there or something and build something that looks like an oil rig and a staircase so they can build from the staircase. Fortnite rules, basically, guys. That, they should try and apply that to Antarctica. A lot of information, though, I should say this as well, a lot of information for this week's show. I can actually tell you my source. It's from a Guy Guthridge lecture. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Guy Guthridge. Gutherdge, if anyone wants to look it up. I did try and watch a Periscope film that was called Byrd Antarctica 1948, but it was a fucking fair bit boring, to be honest, and when it started telling me about fucking penguins coming on the boat, it didn't really grip me. It was it had a sort of a feel to a fucking Disney film to it, and it just felt, it didn't feel informative, so I gave up on it. But I can see why it would be interesting back in 1940s, there weren't many films about, it tells a story. It was a documentary supposedly, but it also sort of had the air of fucking propaganda to it, and the way that they're speaking is like terrible acting, which is probably what this sounds like some of the times when I'm reading my notes. But I mean, I'm not trying to get you to sign your lives away in it to, to join the Navy. I'm just hoping that you might, fucking either find my Patreon, find the Threshold page, and download the Threshold FM app, fucking find me shows, fucking me Here's House shows on Spotify. I don't want you to sign your life. I'm not asking you to fucking throw yourselves under a fucking mammoth on the ice for me. I don't mind if this comes across a bit like I don't know what I'm doing. But when you've got a film coming out, that's trying to tell you about a really fucking interesting thing that happened, you want it to be interesting. Which I'm hoping this is interesting, But I found in the comments section of the Byrd Antarctica 1948 and of the Guy Guthridge lecture, I found a lot of people in the comments section saying that Byrd himself was hospitalised in an asylum for his claims of aliens and mammoths, and then couldn't really find anything out about that on the internet anywhere. So I don't know how they know that, but I'm guessing because a lot of people were saying it, there's probably a bit of truth to it. Maybe a little bit of truth, like he might have had a splinter or something and he ended up in a hospital for a bit, or I don't know, maybe had syphilis and went a bit mad for a while. I don't know, it's just purely speculation. Now, it's like I say, it's not hard to believe, but not because he believed in aliens, but it's not hard to believe that he would have been possibly institutionalised because he came from a clearly influential family that allowed even Richard E Byrd to be in regular correspondence with American presidents. And if he's in their ears and you're thinking, he's fucking lost it a bit here, the cold's got to his brain, his brain's gone a bit dry from all the ice. They might lock him away because he's fucking sending letters. And it's not just letters, though. Like, he spent most of his life sending boxes of apples to influential American people with little handwritten letters, most of the time within the boxes, that would just tell these people fucking things that he'd recently been up to. And that feels fucking weird to me. Like, the contents of one of the short letters that he sent to Franklin D. Roosevelt was 3 or 4 sentences about how he'd found a very rare type of stamp and a little bit about his journeys in the South Pacific to find possible airfields for the American military to use, but it was mainly about the stamps. He may have even included a stamp, I can't, off the top of my head, I'm not sure if he did put a stamp in there. I think he did, for FDR, inside the letter or, inside the box of apples. He was very proud of the stamps as well. Like, it comes across as like the stamp was more important than the mission he'd had, which must really fucking annoy the people that were higher than him in the Navy. But he was definitely a people person, and if he liked you, it seemed like he really liked you. And he also used to take a liking to secretaries as well, not in like a fucking weird rapey way, but he'd send them boxes of apples as well, which is quite nice really, because I'd always imagined that a lot of them sort of people would be overlooked by important people or just seen as some form of fucking walking diary by the people that are using them. But though, then again, he was clever, wasn't he, in PR and that, so this could have just been a clever tactic from him. Sending boxes of apples to someone who's casually overlooked by the other high flyers could be a good way to get a foot in the door with the professional that they represent. I'm not sure what you would do when you receive a box full of apples. Maybe you'd make a jam or a chutney or a preserve, and mate, that could be where we get the fucking phrase "a jar" from. Like, as a box of fruit, you use the box of fruit to get your foot in the door, which means the door's open, but it's only a jar. And it could also be from the astonishment of the recipient after cooking down the apples and realising that a box of apples only fills one solitary jar. But, I mean, that's purely speculation. I'm not too sure. I haven't actually looked that up, but just as a little thought for you there. Byrd had spent his later years as a sort of puppet for the Navy because of his second journey to the ice. During that mission in 1934, he would spend an entire winter on his own on an ice shelf, which is kind of where he went a little bit mad apparently. During that time, he wrote what I think was his 3rd book. I mean, he wasn't as prolific as David Icke, but he probably had to do it by hand rather than on a computer or a typewriter because he was fucking on the ice. Why would you want to... I think it would have been by pen because you're not going to really carry a typewriter around, are you? Anyway, if you want to find it, the book's called Alone. Don't know if they sell it anymore. But it detailed his lonely adventure in Antarctica. It could be during this time that his stories of meeting an ancient civilization stems from, though. Historians claim that he suffered carbon monoxide poisoning and that he regularly sent electronic messages to the other naval staff explaining how happy and healthy he was, and the messages that they were on about get described as becoming quirkier and quirkier as time went on. And it was these messages themselves that led to his retrieval early from the ice and probably meant that he was never going to get sent there again. But what if these messages were actually letters? What if they were letters describing a long-lost civilization that lives inside the hollow earth? It seems more probable to me, a taxidermist, that Byrd was telling people about secrets that they were trying to hide, and that's why they kept him on the payroll, and that's also why they brought him back. Maybe when he spent a bit of extra time in the schools, he was reading, some like forbidden books in the library, and he learnt about these things. He's like, I'm going to go there and have a look at this, but I can never let them know that I've read these books. Just to get an idea in your head of how he found out about it. Because if he was sending these messages out to the naval people back at base, who else could have heard them and spread them out, or made little copies of them, fucking like colouring the backs of them with a bit of wax or something. I don't know how they would have photocopied stuff back then, but who else was he sending them to? They could have simply just left him there to die, if he was doing this, and they could have left him there to die, but then they wouldn't have known who else he was sending these messages out to, and who else had heard these messages, and because killing him would obviously solve the problem, but then the other people that were receiving these messages could have come and saved him, and in turn they could have met the Hollow Earthers, or maybe sampled a little bit of mammoth meat. Now, the story of him that seems to be pushed is that the Navy began to take a disliking to him because he was no longer cutting his hair and he was reading books to keep himself company, even though, he was alone in a fucking tundra, probably trying to stave off the fucking impending madness. And this makes me wonder, is long hair on men, is that supposed to be like a superpower? Because you've got, a modern day example of it is that fucking, the guy that plays Aquaman, that Jason Momoa, because he's a fucking beast, mate. Now, is that because he's got long hair? I mean, I know I've got long hair, and it's not made me all fucking bulky and strong, innit, but maybe it will in time as I sort of reach this age, I don't know. Does having long hair, does it allow us to achieve things that shorter-haired men can't achieve? Jesus, mate. Jesus supposedly had long hair as well, and he had literal superpowers. Then they invented Superman and gave him a fucking short quiff to make some people believe that's what people with superpowers have, a quiff. And I'm not trying to say that I have superpowers by any means, or that I have a leaky oven, and that obviously that's where he was getting the fucking carbon monoxide poisoning from. I didn't say that before. It was a stove apparently that was leaking in his hut, tent, house, igloo. I have no idea what he was living inside of, but it was a stove anyway that gave him the carbon monoxide poisoning. But the point I'm making about long hair, though, is that I feel at the moment that I've achieved more with long hair than I ever did when I had short hair. So, could hairdressers secretly be government officials using chemicals and scissors to trim our naturally forming antennae that allow us to tap into the world around us, like the blue guys in Avatar? Anyway, when he got back to America, Richard E. Byrd was placed as officer in charge of at least 3 operations, but this meant that he would never again set foot on the frozen continent ever again, and that he was only in charge in an almost honorary way, like the way that a university will give a fucking celebrity a degree, even though they've never read one of them books in their life, just to make the university look better. It would make the expedition look better by having him at the helm, if you like, even though he would never actually be on the literal helm on the boat. Now, right, I mentioned Avatar a minute ago, and it's because of a few things. Not just the fucking long hair and that and shoving it up. Did they shove the hair up the horse's arse in Avatar? I think they get the hair, wouldn't they, of the, what they called the Nememites or something, and they'd shove the hair. They either shoved it down the horse's ear or reached around under the tail and shoved it up the horse's arse, I think. I can't remember, it was years ago when I watched it. But they sent Byrd to possibly scout Antarctica, and then they found out at a later date. Well, no, sorry, they didn't find out. I'm fucking getting well ahead of myself. So they sent Byrd to scout Antarctica, and then they followed him in like a day later, 2 days later, with the cutting edge of technology, like literally the cutting edge as well, not like pun unintended this time, but it was these new steel ships that could break through the ice, an aircraft carrier that was fucking swarming in planes, and helicopters, and their helicopter landing pads were quite new on boats at the time, and a submarine as well at the back. Then, like I say, they were all the forefront of weaponry for the time. Just like in Avatar, mate, where the main character, who was disabled as well, just like Byrd was said to be injured. I know that, obviously an injury isn't a disability, but maybe James Cameron didn't want it to be too on the nose. Maybe he couldn't get it past the officials in the office, so, they made the character in Avatar disabled to represent Richard E. Byrd going there and meeting the Hollow Earthers, Anyway, the fella in the film, he makes contact with the blue guys, just like Byrd is said to have made contact with the ice, on the ice with the Hollow Earthers, with the Agarthians. Then they followed him in with weaponry to try and obtain the unobtainium. At the start of the Periscope film I mentioned about 10-15 minutes ago, give or take, they said that Antarctica was a landmass larger than the US and Europe combined, and that it was full of raw materials. Now, the place that they live in Avatar has raw materials as well, and that's pretty big and all. Like, it's I think it's a planet or something, mate. So, and the guy in the film also says, this isn't the guy in the Avatar film, this is the guy in the Periscope film, Byrd's Antarctica, 1948. He said that when they get there, they want to release the unknown treasures of Antarctica, which, to me, again, sounds a little bit like Avatar. Some other bits in the Periscope film as well about Operation High Jump, though. They were feeding dogs in that. In about 5 minutes in, they introduced these two huskies, which were, I think the huskies, the baby huskies that they show were called, I think one was called High Jump and one of them was called Long Jump or something like that. They were stupid names for a dog anyway. And they were feeding them multivitamins. And now I can't help but wonder, was that a way for Big Pharma to introduce... Now, that's Big Pharma with a PH, not Big Pharma with an F. Was it a way for them to introduce itself to the public, just like sort of ease themselves into the people's minds, like, ooh, they're good for healthy dogs, and I'm already healthy, them dogs are already healthy, but they're good for them, so they'll be good for me too, that kind of thing, get people thinking, I want to take some multivitamins and tablets, and it seems like a way of, because they would and they make a point of saying, we give these tablets to these dogs every day to keep them fit and strong, which seems like a way of normalising taking medication every day. And another weird thing I noticed from the Periscope film, when they did the expedition, it looks like they fucking just cut straight through South America, which was weird. I didn't know there was a gap between South America and North America. That could just be me being dumb, but I didn't know that existed. I didn't know that was possible. But I'm not picking it apart. I'm not here to pick things apart. But they flew the Jolly Roger flag, which we now associate with pirates and privateers. But back then, they say it was just used when they would cross the equator. Literally a skull and crossbones, a black and white flag, skull and crossbones. Now, all the time now, skulls and crossbones, especially skulls, but a skull and crossbones as well, they're always associated with the bad guys in many other pieces of media. So, when did this change come about? Was it to hide their identity on their way to the ice so that they couldn't be held accountable for wiping out an entire race of aliens? And there's another bit that I'll mention in a bit. There was a film, a very short film called Xenogenesis, which was James Cameron's first film that he directed. Now that's got a little bit of something in it as well that seems to play on and change the whole dynamic of what's seen as good and what's seen as bad in a film. So, but I'll get onto that in a bit where it will make more sense for you. The Byrd's Antarctica 1948 Periscope film also made a point about the whales of the Bay of Whales, each having about 2,000 litres of oil in each of the bodies. But I mean, this was obviously long before the international whaling ban of 1986, so there's probably not much there to go off. Like, you can't really pick things out there. And if you are new to the show and you want to learn a little bit about the international whaling ban, go back to what I think was episode 2, Big Shrimping. It's all about the shrimp conspiracy and how the shrimp and the whales are possibly trying to kill us, if that's of any interest to you at all. But carrying on with what we're on about here. What if these giant creatures are there because they need to protect the hole to the hollow earth, and that's the reason why the whales are so big, just to be purely to be intimidating? Or maybe it's a gravity thing. They're closer to gravity, so they move what seems slower because and they've grown so big because they need to be stronger to be able to move, where gravity's stronger because it's at the hole of the hollow earth. Just as a little side note there, maybe by sending the steel ships in to break the ice, they were able to release the whales and disperse them using the helicopters, like fucking... Because I reckon the guard dogs of the sea, the whales, would chase after the helicopters, because a dog would, wouldn't it? A dog would chase after a drone, so I would imagine that a whale would chase after some helicopters, especially if they've never seen them before. They'd be like, "Wow, what the fuck's that?" Or maybe, that's what the submarine was for. In like the same way like fucking Pepe Le Pew would disguise himself, or Wile E. Coyote would put on some fake boobs and a bit of lippy to disguise himself, or even like Bugs Bunny would throw on a dress. Maybe they painted the submarine up to resemble a whale, and they used it to flirt with the whales, and that's maybe that's why fucking sonar was invented, mate, so they could find where the whales were making noises and the dolphins, and they'd be like, right, we got some fin whales over there, pilot fin whales. So do you want to play them the song they like, play them the vibrations they like, before they learn how to use vibrations on people, kind of thing. But yeah, they'd use the submarines dressed up like a girl whale, maybe on one side and a boy whale on the other, because that was like a big stage show, I think, in the time, wasn't it? Like the 30s or 40s, where you'd get people where one side of the face looked like a man with a moustache and the other side of the face looked like a ballerina woman. And they put on a show by themselves on the stage. Maybe they just did that with a submarine in order to coax as many whales away from there as possible, so they could access the hollow earth without being attacked by the whales. Maybe not so they could maybe they wouldn't get attacked by the whales, definitely, but it would clear a bit of space so that they'd be able to get to the shores much easier of the at the time unexplored continent. Now, I couldn't actually find any evidence at all that suggests that never happened. So that could be how it came about. But Avatar feels important as a film with all of this, because I think a lot of directors use all their films to try and tell one long story, even though like they're all seemingly different on the surface. They tell one long story from the director's mind, just like how Antarctica is all ice on the surface, but beneath it it's all mountains and holes to Agartha and mammoths. So I mentioned it very, very briefly, Xenogenesis. So we'll start with Cameron's debut directorial dalliance, the Xenogenesis. It tells the quick story of a ship, a man, and a woman, like a spaceship, a huge spaceship as well. And they're tasked with saving humanity from a cataclysm and to start the new cycle of life, which could refer to the new cycle that we learnt about in what I think was the Giants episode that the Native American, well, at least a portion of Native Americans seem to believe in. But in this film, though, everyone's been dead for 50,000 years, and there's an AI-controlled robot that cleans the ship and tries to eradicate the human that's walking around the ship. So what if this is a telling of what happened in Antarctica? Like, because, there's a thing, so be it a collection of people, a collection of aliens, or an actual literal creature that tried to destroy the humans there, because the modern humans like Byrd that have just got there were so unrecognisable to the life that was known in ancient times of what we would consider maybe humans or something, I don't know, like the main dominant species of the planet. Maybe this being or this group didn't recognise the humans, and that's what that's representing. But and also, though, by being preserved in ice as well, that 50,000 years would fucking fly by, mate. So we also see a machine in the film breaking through a sheet of metal, but ice can be a sheet too, as we've learned, like sheet ice sheets, So, and given the production, and when you watch the film, it doesn't look, obviously he didn't have loads of money to throw at it, I wouldn't have thought. So maybe it was difficult to make ice look right on camera. So what they did was they used metal instead, which, what was weird though, is that this is what I was getting at before when I said there's a little bit in this that changes the idea of what's good and what's bad in a film. Because if you take into account like maybe the past, maybe going as far back as Star Wars, like red is bad, blue is good kind of thing, you know. I mean, obviously if you're into football that don't really work because you like whatever you like, but only like fucking nutters really are cheering on fucking Palpatine and Vader, aren't they? People want fucking the you know, Yoda and that the Jedi to win, or even in other films though you've got the red are bad, blue are good. Anyway, and when you're playing video games, usually, unless you're colourblind, the red names are the bad guys, the ones you want to kill. The blue ones are your team. Anyway, I've gotten off topic there. In the film in Xenogenesis, the blue beam is that comes from the threatening robot, which means, in my eyes, that big robot is actually the good guy, and the red beam itself comes from the people, and it's actually a person inside of a robot, whereas the blue beam is the AI robot. So you know that the AI robot's doing its job, it's doing the right thing, what it thinks is right, and that goes against everything at the moment in mainstream media. And this goes with what conspiracy theorists say, everything's being inverted. But like you, as I said, usually because red is evil, blue is good. So maybe the life form protecting the entrance to Hollow Earth is actually good, and the explorers of the ice are evil. Is that what James Cameron was trying to tell us here in Xenogenesis? Now, the next film he directed was Piranha 2, The Spawning. Now, I'll be dead honest, I haven't watched this. I didn't make a point of watching this for the show. Didn't want to. I just looked up what it was about, and you can kind of really guess what it's going to be about, or the kind of film it's going to be. And it's a film about a group, though. If you break it down to its key components now, so it makes sense into what I'm trying to get across about this one long story Cameron's trying to teach us. It's a group of water-dwelling creatures killing people. Now, ice, all ice is, mate, is water. Hard water. So, my theory stands a bit spurious, but Cameron supposedly, from what I've read about this, he didn't actually get to edit the film or have all that much directorial input into the film. So, even though it may not be possible to tie it in perfectly with the overarching story of James Cameron's films, it does tie in somewhat with my idea of him telling one long story. Now, the next film he directed was The Terminator, which is a film I imagine we've all seen. I'll sum it up for you, and tell you how it fits in. It's a film about a robot being sent back in time to stop a woman giving birth to a kid that would later try to stop the evil corporation Skynet. Although Skynet isn't exactly evil, it's just doing its job far too well in the future, which is pretty similar to Xenogenesis, about a robot doing its job of cleaning the area too well and trying to kill the people that it's there who it should be working with. This now introduces the idea of time travel to Antarctica and to Richard E. Byrd, and that makes a lot of sense when you take into account that the UFOs that are supposed to be there, because a lot of people nowadays believe that UFOs are capable of time travel, or at least interdimensional travel. Maybe not purposeful time travel, but they can reappear at different periods of time because they can travel at such speeds. Next is Aliens, which is the second Alien film. Now, in that, again, ice. There's a woman that's held in cryogenic sleep for about 50 or so years, which ties in with the Xenogenesis story, because that was 50,000 years, so still, 50. And the idea that something or someone is sleeping beneath the ice. In this, it was Ripley, but in the real world, it could be the Anunnaki, it could be what's in later alien lore, where it's the fucking Prometheus people, whatever the fuck they were called, the giants. Now, considering the first Alien film is supposed to be a representation of America going to war in Vietnam against an enemy that they were unprepared to fight for, you could argue that Americans were also unprepared to fight a war on the ice too. Now, I don't know if that is actually true, that that's what Aliens was about. Now, that's not... I haven't made that up. That's from reading other people's... I like to read what other people see in films, because I want to know if I'm the only one that sees things in films that aren't there. And that was quite a common occurrence when I would read about other people's opinions of this. I never saw it in Aliens. I thought it was just about them going to a planet and fighting things that they didn't understand. Some people have took it a step further, and they explain that it's about how America went to a war in Vietnam to fight in conditions they'd never fought in, against people who live in those conditions and could only ever beat them in those conditions. But that may or may not be right, I'm not sure. But it would be fair to say that if Americans went to war on the ice tundras of the Antarctica, they wouldn't be prepared for that fight as well. So that could tie the stories of it being based on Vietnam. That could mean that that's a lie. An Alien was actually about a war fought against an enemy that resides in Antarctica. Now, they fight the alien queen in the film as well, and I don't think they specifically kill it either. And in the film, the xenomorphs also, bear in mind, they live in the tunnels underneath the city, underground, which could be a reference to the tunnels of Hollow Earth, which conspiracy theorists say are present at the South Pole as like the main entrance. So, you can see here how all these films are telling the same story. Next, we got Terminator 2. Now, Terminator 2, I'm going to be honest, is a bit of a stretch, but the baddie in that was made from a liquid metal, and I would argue that could mean ice, because it's a liquid in a solid form, if you know what I mean. It's water, but it's frozen, so you could have a liquid metal, but ice could be just as hard, I guess, as some types of metal. So it could be a convoluted way to disguise the concept of ice itself. Plus, it's a lot more Hollywood than saying, oh, here's the Terminator, it's indestructible, it's made of ice, because, or water, it makes it more scary, doesn't it, to make it made of ice, than to make it made of ice. To make it made of metal is scarier. Now, they managed to beat the bad Terminator by using liquid metal against it. Could this be why people are actually worried about melting the polar ice caps? Because there are things hidden within the ice that will attack us, if it melts. Like in Ice Age, mate, where the dinosaurs start coming out from under the ice, which, as well, could also be considered to be lizard-like life forms who many believe inhabit the Hollow Earth. Maybe a time traveller is responsible for inventing this liquid metal, or so-called frozen water, that is currently covering the biggest entrance to the Hollow Earth. Now, his next film, James Cameron's film, is True Lies, which again is one that I haven't actually seen. It's got Arnold Schwarzenegger in it again, and he's I think he's like an undercover cop or something. I get, but anyway, like I say, I haven't seen it, so I had to read summaries and other people's reviews and things like that. But long story short, it's about a group of terrorists trying to blow up the US with nukes, but if you think about it, America is pretty big and it covers a lot of a continent, and you could easily imagine that the US in this film represents the southern ice caps, and that it's actually about someone trying to stop people from destroying the ice caps if you was to look at it through a very specific lens. But we can pick up the theory again with Cameron's next film, one of his biggest known films, Titanic. A film that is literally about ice fucking killing people, and again the development of new technology that gets involved with ice, and the ice itself destroys the boat, kills loads of people. But what's important to remember is that a lot of an iceberg is actually underwater, so you could say that it's literally about something under the surface of the exposed ice being dangerous. It's also worth noting that many believe this film was made to convince the population that the Titanic actually sank, because many people believe it wasn't actually the Titanic that sank at all, but there was a last-minute switcheroo, if you like, which caused the Oceanic to set sail in place of the Titanic, and it was all an elaborate ruse, allegedly planned by JP Morgan to kill a lot of his competitors after he invited them to America. So that could mean it isn't outside the realms of possibility that James Cameron uses his films to try and teach the viewer about secret stories from our history. Now, the next two things that Cameron directed, they were both documentaries, and guess what they're about? Go on, I'll give you 10 seconds here. I'll actually even time it, mate. I'll time it. I'll time it from now. 10 seconds. You got 10 seconds to tell me in the Discord what his documentaries are about. 2, 1. I hope someone's fucking answered. Obviously, they're about things fucking under the water, aren't they? You got names like Ghosts of the Abyss, and more on the nose this time, Aliens of the Abyss, implying that there is something otherworldly in the oceans, or maybe, more specifically, in the abyss under the earth itself, deep in the abyss of the Hollow Earth. Now this leads us to Avatar, a film about a man ingratiating himself amongst a bunch of otherworldly creatures so that his bosses can destroy them and gain natural resources, which is exactly what they say at the start of the film about Richard E. Byrd's voyage to Antarctica, which was actually called, I've been fucking saying the title wrong every time, Antarctica, Men and Ships of the US Navy. That's the title of it, which was released all the way back in 1942. May have even got the year wrong earlier on as well. So, could Richard E. Byrd actually be Ripley? Was Richard E. Byrd the disabled man from Avatar? Was Richard E. Byrd the Terminator, or is James Cameron the Terminator, and Byrd was actually Sarah Connor, but after many attempts of stopping him, Cameron learned to work with the mysterious John Connor in the future in order to save Richard E. Byrd, because if he had never gone to the ice, we wouldn't know how to stop the icy T-1000s. And unfortunately, guys, it's something that we may never know. I'm the world around you, and this was Pause for Thought on Threshold FM.